Thank you, everybody, for coming in tonight. I really appreciate it. Welcome to our private event here. We're going to talk about functional medicine as it relates to autoimmune sicknesses. My name is Aras. I'm your host, and I'm co-founder of syncH. We're all gathered here tonight because we all care about our health. And I want to make sure that we all have ways to find out how we're going to heal ourselves, our loved ones, from autoimmune sicknesses or other chronic illnesses. Or you may not have a sickness, but you want to remain healthy, you want to reach your optimal health. And we have amazing speakers here, our functional medicine doctors who will guide us through this journey. And I hope that you leave tonight with some of the insights that you get here today that will allow you to do some action to reach your optimal health. And I want to start with this, an interesting fact that I found out. Did you guys know that autoimmune sicknesses affect more people than heart disease, diabetes, and cancer combined? National Institute of Health says 24 million people in America are affected from autoimmune sicknesses, and this number is obviously growing. But what's sad is also, last 2 decades, the numbers have tripled. Now, there are 80 different autoimmune sicknesses that I was able to research. And your lupus, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, arthritis. And what's amazing is the numbers are growing and nobody's doing anything. And conventional medicine hasn't been a helpful resource to be able to heal us from this modern epidemic. I had a personal story where I had a chance to overcome Crohn's disease after dealing with it decades. And that really inspired me to actually not only start syncH, but also I wanted to figure out how we're going to actually heal this epidemic. I think this is something that is very relevant, very timely, and we want to make sure that we put our minds together. I think this event is great. It inspires a lot of people to get, put together our minds and find a way. And I want to actually thank our panel here too, and they've been amazing. They took their times to be able to come to this event, and I want to thank all of you guys for coming as well. And before I introduce our doctors, I want to also thank our sponsors who made this event possible. And I want to thank Upcider for allowing us to host this event, the private event here in their amazing venue. Thank you, Upcider. I also, I don't know if you guys had a chance to get some snacks. They're hiding in the back, but there's some healthy snacks there, some refreshments. They're all provided by Whole Foods, thanks to them. And also, I want to thank Marin TV, allowing us to produce this event, where they allowed us to have equipments like video and audio to make sure that this event is professionally done. So thanks to Marin TV for allowing this. And we love to support community-based TV programming. So thanks to them. So when my co-founder Levent is back there and I started syncH, we still had one mission in mind, and that still stays the same. We wanted to actually create more awareness about holistic and functional medicine, and also we want to create an environment where we can connect our community members, so like some of you here, with trustworthy holistic doctors that actually cares about you. And we're lucky and we're humbled to have some of these doctors here that actually will give us the guidance to help us in that journey. And I want to introduce you guys to all of them, starting with Dr. Amy here. Dr. Amy Nett got her medical degree upon graduating from Georgetown University. She completed her residency in radiology at Stanford University. Dr. Amy began studying functional medicine after becoming frustrated with the conventional medical model in treating some of her own health issues. She's based in Palo Alto and working as a clinician at California Center for Functional Medicine. Another clinician at California Center for Functional Medicine is Dr. Ramzi Asfour. He's board-certified infectious disease and internal medicine doctor, graduating from New York Medical College. He specializes in autoimmune disorders, chronic infections, gut imbalances, and detoxification. Dr. Ramzi is currently an assistant clinical professor of medicine at UCSF, and his clinic is based in San Rafael. And last but not least, Dr. Mima Geere. She has earned her medical degree from University of Vermont and gotten her master's in nutrition from Columbia University. She's a certified doctor from Institute of Functional Medicine and trained in Dr. Deepak Chopra's Ayurvedic Perfect Health Program as a certified instructor. Dr. Mima combines Western medicine with some of the healing elements of Eastern medicine like Ayurveda. She's specialized in functional nutrition and is the founder of Mimicking Health and Wellness, and she's based in Larkspur. Please give them a round of applause for taking their time here. So I want to structure the panel. I'll have some questions to our doctors here, but then also want to hear from you guys. Maybe we'll cover somewhere around 40 minutes of what we can cover here, and then I want to open it up to you guys and then see what we can actually hear from you, so that all your efforts to come in here in person can actually resonate. So I want to start things off, and we're talking about functional medicine. And a lot of people may heard about it or may just want to, I want to level set things here. And I want to ask our doctors, how would you define functional medicine? And how does it differ from conventional medicine as it relates to autoimmune diseases? So maybe we can start.
So thanks for coming out. It's nice to see so many people here this evening. I tend to explain functional medicine. I like to use the analogy of a tree. Have any of you heard of that analogy? Yeah, okay. So this is new, but in case a couple of you haven't, I'll share it anyway. So I tend to think of functional medicine as you have this tree analogy, and let's say the leaves start turning brown or something's happening with the bark. In conventional medicine, there's going to be a doctor who's going to address. Sorry, that's sort of cutting in and out. Can you guys hear me if I don't use the microphone? Can you guys hear me in the back? So sound? Okay. So sorry if it cuts in and out. So with conventional medicine, there's going to be a specialist who's going to deal with, the leaves turning a different color. There's a different doctor who's going to address, why the bark looks a little bit funny. In functional medicine, we're really trying to get at the root causes. So we're looking at the root system, we're looking at the soil, we're thinking about these really foundational aspects to support the whole tree, to support that whole structure. So we don't just want to deal with symptoms. Of course, there's a role for addressing acute symptoms. So if somebody has pain, insomnia, I want to take care of those. I want to make sure we're minimizing pain, improving sleep. But at the same time, looking at what's really the underlying issue. So that idea, in terms of really getting at the underlying or root cause issue.
Hi everybody, also thanks for coming out. And I agree with Amy, I often use a similar analogy with the tree. I like to talk about the ologists, right? Conventional medicine has, in fact, I am sort of one of them. They have the cardiologist, they have the gastroenterologist, the otolaryngologist, and you can name all of the ologists you can think of. I was the infectious diseaseologist. So that's sort of nice in a way, right? Because it keeps my life, my former life, it was very simple. I had an infection, I would treat it, and bye-bye, and if it was Lyme disease, I felt bad, but there wasn't anything in that paradigm that I could do. Obviously, I wanted to, and that's why one of the reasons I'm doing functional medicine. But in the 15-minute paradigm of conventional medicine, it works. So that you see your doctor, you have reflux, they give you the purple pill, and you feel better. So you're happy, you rate them on, if you have Kaiser, you get a survey every 5 minutes, and you rate them, and then they're happy, they get a good rating, you're happy, you feel better. The fact that you're going to get kidney disease and osteoporosis in 10 years hasn't touched anybody's mind. So it was the quick fix problem down the road. So that's a lot of conventional medicine is great for heart attack, broken bones, surgeries, other things, urgent. Definitely, it has extended people's lives tremendously. First aid, all that kind of stuff. But there's definitely a role for a balanced approach, and I think the balance is starting to shift, but it is just starting to shift now. We've got a long road to go.
Sorry. I agree. I also am a bit of a tech mind a little bit in how I think about functional medicine. So from a technology, because we're in San Francisco, standpoint, functional medicine, I believe, is really the future of medicine. And it's not quite what it can be. It's getting there. It's on the trajectory. And the reason I say that is because it takes a systems approach to the body, which makes so much more sense than a reductionist pinpoint approach. They're both important. They're both relevant. What's outside is as relevant as what's inside. But in conventional medicine, we forget about everything else and about the whole picture. And what we do by forgetting that is we have a microscopic view of the whole human being. And you can't really heal that way. So when you really think about healing, it takes the whole approach. But what's cool about functional medicine is that it's interested and open to technology and open to bringing in modern science into the practice of medicine, even though it's holistic and whole whole person. So that's how I'm summing it.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just going to ask something, trying to hone in more and looking at it from the lens of autoimmune diseases. How do you guys assess and how do you treat your patients in the first place when they come to you as an autoimmune patients? And what are some of the methods that you use, tests or other things to actually have them start that journey in functional medicine?
So it's a good question, and in many ways answering it like that would be a conventional approach. So, so I'm going to step back and say, what we always say in functional medicine is that, what are the underlying causes, root causes of why this presentation is occurring today, and to really ask the question of what we call, what is the base of the matrix? Because in functional medicine, we use this really futuristic matrix model of medicine, which is a two-dimensional piece of paper right now, but I can see it being three-dimensional in the future. Basically, it's the idea that we're all composed of the same basic concepts. We need nourishment. We need to not have stress. We need to not have anxiety in our lives. And then there's this idea of genetics and microbiome and toxicity, right? So you put all that together and you have the milieu that makes essentially wellness or it makes disease. And so when you approach it that way, you start to look at where are the imbalances in the person's life. And that sometimes is very apparent, and sometimes it takes a really long 40-page questionnaire to get to what that root cause might have been that triggered things. The testing, often by the time people come, at least to most functional medicine doctors, they've already had a battery of tests done and they already have a diagnosis. So, and for the most part, you're not starting from scratch. You have a lot of things to look at. And again, it's about looking at the common trends, the pattern recognition, just like all medicine. But with autoimmune conditions, any antibody anywhere in the body, it doesn't matter if it's psoriasis or if it's Crohn's, you're still dealing with an antibody. And so when you're approaching autoimmune conditions, you're looking at it with that uniform point of view.
I definitely agree. I think that's a great way to start the conversation. And autoimmune, evaluating somebody for autoimmune disease is actually that's one of the things that functional medicine does best, because you're really looking at the whole picture. I think lots of things are important in in why a certain person would get an autoimmune disease. You can have genetic risk factors. You need genetic risk factors, and a lot of people don't have autoimmune disease that have those risk factors, and you often need a trigger. Why did you get, is it stress? What was the trigger? What's the thing that's the mediator that's keeping it going, and why do you keep having, what's perpetuating this illness? Is it, we like to call it the SAD diet, that's the first one is to start with the gut. So a standard American diet, most of you guys know we call the SAD diet. It's kind of funny, but there's a lot of truth to our processed foods and all of that. I also like to think of the hygiene hypothesis. So I love it. Sometimes, the other day I saw a woman who was just in her first trimester of pregnancy, and she just wanted a wellness check. So I don't see a lot of pregnant women in my practice, but I was very happy that we could talk about things like the hygiene hypothesis. And one of my favorite studies is this Swedish study where pacifiers were dropped, two groups, pacifiers were dropped on the floor. One group, they sterilized the pacifier. The other group, the mom licked it, gave it to the baby. Which group of babies 3 years later had more autoimmune disease? The first one, yeah, that were sterilized. So that's the whole hygiene hypothesis. And so we think about that in the setting of autoimmune disease. If the body doesn't have something to fight against, it's going to fight against you. But that decision is sort of made early on in life for a lot of people, and later in some people. And we do a full spectrum evaluation. Is there stress? Are there toxins? Is there mold? Are there infections? Are there other problems causing this? And we'll do a battery of examinations and questionnaires. Some of them way too long, but trying to look at all of those things.
Let me know if you guys can't hear me in the back. So the other complicated thing about autoimmune disease is that there is, when we say autoimmune disease, we're talking about maybe 80 different diseases, right? Because what differentiates them is what are the autoantibodies attacking, and they're all attacking different tissues. So probably somewhere in the ballpark of 80 different autoimmune conditions. We don't really understand autoimmune disease. We don't know there's, what causes, Dr. Ramzi mentioned, genetic predisposition, environmental trigger, and leaky gut. Maybe those are the three things of the stool that we need to have in order for autoimmune disease to manifest. But again, this isn't always clear. So we know that autoimmune disease, there is an imbalance in the immune system. The immune system is inappropriately... This close? Okay. Is that working now?
It worked better when you in your mouth.
Yes. What did you want me to do?
Wait, let's stand there.
Hold it just worked. Okay. So again, what we're looking for is what's causing this immune imbalance. Why is the body inappropriately attacking itself? So the first thing we're going to do with all of our patients, again, get them off the standard American diet, which is going to be some variation of a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. There's also autoimmune paleo diet. So there's a lot of different dietary approaches we can take, both for identifying potential triggers and then maybe even for treatment options. And I think we'll get into that later. But most of the patients that come into our practice, again, we're going to recommend a dietary approach. And then we're testing pretty much anything that we can get from you. So we're doing stool testing, breath testing. We want to get the makeup of the gut microbiome. Is there gut inflammation? Any evidence that there's leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability, because that might be one of the predisposing factors to autoimmune disease. So test the gut any way you can. We're also going to do some urine testing to look at organic acids. These are not tests that your conventional medical doctors are going to understand. That does not mean they should be brushed off, and that also doesn't mean that they are, a definitive guide to how to treat you. It's another way of trying to understand the body, trying to understand the immune system, and trying to start inching things back into balance. So the other thing about functional medicine the gluten, the dairy, these really common triggers. Then we're going to look at your gut microbiome, decrease the inflammation. Then we're going to look at mold. Then we're going to look at heavy metals. And I mean, one of the things I feel like, we have to tell all our patients, and it's this huge shift from conventional medicine, which is here's your pill, take this, your gut, quick fix, right? Functional medicine in our really complex patients, because again, as Dr. Mima mentioned, like our typical patient is, I've seen 15 different doctors. They keep giving me antidepressants, but I'm not depressed. Something is wrong with me. And this is heartbreaking because there's normally something very wrong with these people. And so we often are going to have these multiple layers to deal with. And, I sort of tell people, let's settle in. We've got about a year's work ahead of us. And it's just slow and steady. But, you didn't get this way overnight, so we're not going to fix you overnight. And it's just a matter of having that patience and just sort of dealing with each piece, each layer to get the whole system back in balance.
I don't know if this works.
Hello.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So, this is great, by the way. Thank you for breaking it down for the test level, too. I was curious about some of the things that you guys approach. Now, what is some of the latest trends and maybe cutting-edge research that's been done on autoimmune diseases, the way that it's been treated? I know we touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to see from the experts here to see what you guys have been hearing that you can share with our audience here. And you can
Oh, me? Okay, I go first. There's a lot going on. I think that there's definitely a lot going on in the conventional world about which $30,000 a year or $50,000 a year medication they can give you to suppress your immune system so that your risk of TB and cancer is higher. In the functional medicine world, I mean, we really need to think of some of the basics. Just like everybody has mentioned so far, I don't think it's a major, there's more research, there's more evidence-base coming out. There's a lot of talk and research on what's called molecular mimicry. So that's an interesting field, and that's why whenever you have a, Dr. Nett said something about leaky gut. So what is that? That's, when the cells in your intestines are, instead of being tight like this, they're loose. And you're getting larger molecules passing through. And then you form antibodies against those. So antibodies are what your immune system produces to fight infections, classically. Sometimes the antibodies, you really shouldn't be forming antibodies against food, but and it's often food, but not always. But you're forming antibodies against something that you're ingesting, and those antibodies sometimes look like proteins on certain parts of your body. So let's take lupus for an example. So somebody with lupus can have antibodies to the lining of organs, classically. So your brain, heart, lungs, lots of organs. And so lupus can involve the whole body. So sometimes a protein from food, a particle, can look like a protein on those membranes, and then your body forms an antibody to the food, but that also attacks the membrane. So one of the ways to deal with that is to get rid of that antibody production, the food, and so clean up the diet. So what are the most common antigens you've heard? Like everybody's bad boy gluten, like nobody in this room should ever touch gluten again. But it's not quite true, but gluten is the big bad boy, sort of the elephant in the room, for numbers of reasons that we can go into if we have time later. But so getting rid of the antigens. So sometimes if somebody's really sick, we'll put them on a more severe restricted diet. Depends how motivated they are and how quickly they want a response. And these things are hard to stick with in today's society. But in terms of research, that's one of the, molecular mimicry is a hot topic now, where a lot of research is leading to. Celiac disease is a classic gluten sensitivity. We know a lot more about that. And we also think that the prevalence is much higher than we had previously thought, and some of the lab tests probably don't catch all of the celiac. So we know you take away the gluten, they get better. You introduce a little bit of gluten and get worse. And so we know, we certainly know that, but there's a lot more to come. I think the next 5-10 years will demonstrate a lot more specific correlations between antigens that are causing or proteins that are causing the molecular mimicry to happen.
This isn't really cutting edge, I guess, but it kind of is. Worms. Have you guys heard about using worms to treat disease? So helminthic therapy, it's got a lot of research behind it. The science makes a lot of sense, right? We've talked about the hygiene hypothesis and how moving away from being exposed to these things led us down this different pathway, essentially, where your cells are now reacting to themselves because they have nothing else to react to. Well, early on in life, if you were exposed to, other countries or had parasite infections and stuff like that, you would have developed more of a type 2 reaction instead of type 1 reaction, going to the immune cells. And if you go down the type 2 pathway, then you're reacting to this foreign thing that's in your body, and your cells get trained to be exposed to that. So the idea is that we're no longer able to do that. And so what if you treated people with worms, and then we're able to trigger the type 2 immune reaction, not autoimmune, but immune reaction, rather than going towards the autoimmune direction. And so it's a really interesting scientific experiment, and it works for a lot of people, and there's some interesting data on it. So it sounds really scary as a doctor to think about putting worms on people, and goes against everything we were taught, but there's some good efficacy there.
Okay, I'm glad I got a little extra time because I couldn't decide which one I wanted to mention, but I think the research I've been, is that better?
Sorry,
Doesn't like you. It doesn't. Maybe I don't like the microphone. So the research that I've been pretty obsessed with over the past few years has actually been research on fasting. And now we're starting to also see fast mimicking diets. And I think probably a lot of us who've had a health orientation over the decades used to do a great job at healthy whole grains every 2 to 3 hours, right? Everything we should not be doing, we did perfectly. So now, and I know I used to be a little hesitant around fasting, very reluctant to recommend it to patients, but we're seeing more and more research that's suggesting a huge benefit of fasting, whether it's intermittent fasting. There are a lot of different ways to do intermittent fasting. One of the most common ways I'll recommend patients do this is overnight fasting. So as soon as you finish dinner is your start fasting time. First thing of the day, as soon as you have calories, that's when you're going to end fasting. So having that overnight fasting window being about 12 to 14 hours, maybe 16 to 18 hours for some people. Men tolerate this better than women, I think, for the longer fast. And then maybe getting into some longer fasts or even periodic fasting, meaning about a 4 to 5 day fast. Once a year, a couple times a year, depending on what we're dealing with. But we've seen rodent studies. So we've seen rodent studies, not enough studies in humans that recommend it. So not enough studies in humans that I would recommend that this is really ready for prime time, but we've seen studies in mice looking at type 1 diabetes, looking at multiple sclerosis. It's a little bit tricky because the amount of time that mice and rodents need to fast, because their life cycle is shorter, their metabolism is different, they can do a 2-day fast, and we see reversal of type 1 diabetes. We see a decrease in multiple sclerosis. And it's interesting because with the intermittent fasting, where you increase that overnight fast to, let's say, 14 definitely see benefits, improvement in blood sugar control, improvement in cholesterol profiles. There's a lot of benefits. But what we're also looking at is when you do periodic fasting, even some intermittent fasting, we're seeing a process called autophagy. Autophagy is where we start recycling our damaged cells. So our body's effectively clearing out damaged cells, and in particular immune cells, like those white blood cells. So if you fast for 4 to 5 days, you're going to decrease your white blood cells. And if you have an autoimmune condition, those white blood cells, to some extent, they're dysfunctional, right? So you fast for a few days, you're going to significantly decrease that. A lot of the benefit from periodic fasting, meaning like in humans, we're thinking maybe it has to be a 4 to 5 day fast. It probably varies a little bit. But in humans, it's actually, well, in rodents too, it's the refeeding. So when you refeed after an extended fast, you're actually generating new stem cells to produce those white blood cells. So you're starting to rebuild the system. If you're using fresh stem cells, new stem cells, right, to create those white blood cells and those immune cells, you're not necessarily going to have that autoimmunity. So I think the research is not quite there. And what I do tell patients is, look, if you have a severe autoimmune disease or another condition, this is also really useful to be used combined with chemotherapy in cancer. So we're seeing a lot of potential benefits. One of them is autoimmune. If we're not seeing the benefits based on the available treatment, if my option is putting someone on a monoclonal antibody, Humira, one of these things that has just a dreadful list of side effects, let's experiment with fasting. It's not necessarily comfortable, but you get to a point where the option is Humira, another monoclonal antibody, increased risk of, we won't even go through that list of potential adverse effects. It will take the remaining time we have. But I mean, this is, why not? If you look at ancestrally, how we've evolved, if you look at the various religious traditions, where they're solved, everyone has some fasting integrated in there. Maybe there's a health benefit. And so now there's a fast mimicking diet, one that's actually marketed. You can get foods that are packaged, not like the best quality, but that's okay, it's getting there. You can also do a fast mimicking diet by eating 2 avocados a day, because of fasting mimicking, you're keeping low sugar and low amino acids, because our nutrient sensors in the body are primarily looking for the carbohydrates, the sugars, and the amino acids. So by a fairly, high quality fat, such as 2 avocados a day, you get a lot of the benefits of being in a fasting state without the severe degree of discomfort that comes with a strict water fast for 4 to 5 days. Not saying 2 avocados a day is easy, but I think it's a little bit more tolerable. So, and it is research to keep an eye on that I think is almost there and certainly useful even now in some cases.
Wonderful. Definitely warm idea, thought about it. I haven't done it, but it's been amazing. Fasting, yes, there's amazing research out there. Thank you guys for elaborating on that from your perspective. Now, next set of questions I'm going to ask each doctor to answer, and if the other ones actually have something to chime in, please feel free. But Dr. Ramzi, I'll start with you. I know you're particularly focused on and interested in gut imbalances with some of your patients. Now, my question is, what's the role of gut and our microbiome when it comes to autoimmune diseases? So if somebody doesn't have a digestive disorder, but would they still have to deal with gut and microbiome issues that they will see?
So, thanks. Yeah, I think that the microbiome is critically important. And a lot of patients with autoimmune disease might come and see me and they say, well, I don't have any gut issues. And then I said, well, let's just humor me and do this testing anyway, and we find a whole bunch of abnormalities and said, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, I do have bloating or do have something, or even if they don't know that they have issues, it's often, as we all said, the trigger for some of those issues. So I think that's quite, the balance of flora and the diversity of flora is very important. One way to look at it is that you guys have probably all heard of fecal replacement therapy or gut stool transplants. And it's kind of gross, maybe those that you haven't heard of it. It's a lot of my patients have had these things, and they get stool from somebody else, and you do a clean out regimen, and then you get some stool from a scope usually, so you don't actually obviously eat it. So, you then change your microbiome. That's actually one of the best ways to change your microbiome. But in some of those studies that have been done, usually for a bad infection, that's where it's been studied the most, there's been transfer of autoimmune disease. So taking the microbiome of somebody with autoimmune disease can give you autoimmune disease. So it can also give you obesity. It can give you, different conditions. So those two, autoimmune disease and obesity, have been some of the most reported in terms of adverse effects of fecal replacement therapy. And that's a significant, obviously, concern, but it shows us that in autoimmune disease, the gut flora is very important. And so I think maintaining a healthy gut flora and working towards that is a critical component of our approach to autoimmune disease. Anybody else?
Thank you. That was brilliant. I'm actually, Dr. Mima, I'm curious. I know you've specialized in functional nutrition, and nutrition has been a super hot topic, treating some of the, or at least being part of the treatment process for autoimmune diseases. Now, my question is, what are some of the nutritional remedies or dietary plans that you recommend for people that have autoimmune sicknesses or that have that condition?
So nutrition is my favorite topic, mostly because you can manage your symptoms through food. And if you can start to, first of all, I just want to ask, how many people here are suffering from an autoimmune condition? Okay, thank you. So symptom management becomes almost mandatory, doesn't it? Like day to day, being able to not feel the effects of what this condition is doing to you, and also just getting through to the end of the day and having the energy to, continue and go to work and do everything. I actually personally was exposed to toxic substance, and since then developed my own version of an auto antibody. So I have a very close relationship with this. I think it's a combination of food and also what I call detox, which is every single day practicing this, which is why what took me to Ayurveda more was practicing detoxifying, which I think we'll get to in a different question, but to focus on the food. So what really worked for me, and I think works for a lot of patients, is to start to identify your triggers. There's certainly ways to navigate it and to know some of the common antigens, right? But it's not the same for everyone. So we can list them off, gluten, dairy, number 1 and number 2, almost always gluten and dairy. So you can cut that out. Now, I've noticed a difference with dairy, where it's different for cow's milk protein versus goat, and have been able to get by myself, my family, and other people by having goat dairy, goat products, whereas other people don't. Then you go down the list. Legumes, how does your body handle legumes and beans? Right? Not everybody can digest those well. If you cannot, stay away from it. But what I found is boiling them, soaking them overnight, putting some baking soda in them, letting them sit for at least 8 hours, and then boiling them, rinsing it out many, many times. When they're fully digested almost, and then you have them there, it's actually quite okay. But if you go to, the corner shop that didn't do all of that, that's not going to be the case. Then moving to greens, for me and for a lot of patients, having a diet that's packed full of greens, our life source essentially, was, for me, the only way to get by. It was like, how could you have energy without it? But it wasn't until you're in that state that you can notice the difference, because sometimes you tell people to eat greens and they're like, sure. But when you really notice the difference is when you're not feeling well. And so diets packed full of all kinds of dark leafy greens. There's this controversy about the oxalates, and I don't know if everybody's aware of that, whether or not rhubarb and spinach and all these things are actually good for us. I found cooking was often easier to digest and is for my patients than not cooking your food in general when you have an autoimmune condition. So taking just a little bit of an Ayurvedic twist on that, when you think about autoimmunity in terms of Ayurveda, which I can get into if anybody is not familiar, it's basically this idea that the antibodies themselves cause what we consider vata, which is air or ether energy. It's basically energy of movement in the antibodies themselves. So in the state of having an autoimmune condition, you have a vata imbalance. And if that's the case, then it makes perfect sense that you would not eat raw foods when you have an autoimmune condition. I tested it on myself and have tested it on other patients. It's not always true. Sometimes you can manage a green juice and feel okay. But many times it didn't, and something to think about for yourself. How are you dealing with raw foods? Are they really the best thing for you? Because we say eat salads and eat all this stuff, but according to Ayurveda, your food should be cooked. And the only time you can really handle raw foods is when your digestive fires are super strong. And I didn't find that was the case for most autoimmune patients, that digestive fires were not super strong. And so you have to be really gentle. And then just sort of, more cooked foods, really simple foods. I'd also stay away completely from grains as much as possible, but I can handle white rice. And previously I was keto and I would never have had white rice in my diet, but when you develop an autoimmune condition and you're needing to have something that's substantial other than, boiled greens, you're gonna need something, and so you have the white rice. And certainly keto is also another way to go, but I would say then if you are doing that, stay away from the saturated fat version of keto, the one with the bacon and the eggs and almost the Atkins version, but go for more of a vegetarian, slightly, with grass-fed meats, grass-fed butter, that kind of a keto, which isn't really, you can't really get all the way sometimes to true ketosis in that situation. Other things that were easily digestible and are for many of the patients are sweet potatoes, but white potatoes aren't. So think about nightshades and how you can cut out nightshades, because those tend to trigger autoimmune conditions. So there's a lot of nuance into the dietary changes, but there's also a lot of experimentation and figuring out, when you eat something, keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. Monitor what your body feels like after you've eaten it. And if it doesn't feel good, stay away from it for a little bit. Chances are it's a little bit more of a leaky gut situation that we've heard about. And everyone's familiar with leaky gut, right? So leaky gut is basically when, your gut lining that should look like this kind of starts to do this under stress or different conditions. And things get in that shouldn't be getting into your bloodstream and start causing problems. So in that scenario, sometimes it doesn't matter what you're eating, it's going to trigger. So that's why I got more into mind-body medicine, is because I realized that in order to really get through this, you need to relax, not eat in a stressful situation. It's better not to eat than to eat stressed. And be really careful about what you're eating. Try your best to cook yourself if you can, because you know exactly what's inside of it.
I just wanted to emphasize a couple of points. That's awesome, and exactly a lot of what I tell patients as well. And I often use the example of, when's the last time you had a salad at a Chinese restaurant? Because, think about traditional forms of eating. And greens are to be cooked. Veggies are to be cooked. A lot easier to digest. Also, in terms of eating traditional foods, like we had the quinoa craze, I think you guys heard about. But quinoa is great for native South Americans. But are your genes ready to eat quinoa? And by the way, how do they prepare the quinoa versus how do you prepare it? Or how do you prepare the corn? Do you nixtamalize your corn? Do you guys even know what that is? That's processing it with lime or lye, and the traditional way. Or do you roast your peppers and peel your tomatoes and all these kinds of things? Traditional methods of preparing foods have a lot of reason and a lot of the reason is removing compounds called lectins that are inflammatory and will trigger autoimmune disease. So you have to think about what you're eating, how it's prepared, and then one more thing is it's how you're eating. So when you're stressed, so I tell people, think about the movie The Terminator. Where's your nervous system? It's like stuck on in super fast mode when you're watching The Terminator. And if you're eating while you're watching that movie, how are you going to digest? Digestion is a slow nervous system activity. So that's calm dinner, quiet, sitting down, not standing, not eating rushed, not eating in the car. All of these things affect digestion. And as we said, a lot of our autoimmune disease is related to digestion and leaky gut to digestion. So you have to think about how you eat, what you eat, and how you prepare it.
And then I think the other thing that I would emphasize is experimenting. No, it's going to work. It's going to work. Experimenting with the foods that don't work for you, but then eating as wide a variety of foods within, again, our preference is going to be pretty much like grain-free, gluten-free, certainly. But eating as wide a variety of foods as you can within that and not being scared of foods. I see that a lot in patients who are chronically ill, and that'll have an effect on your nervous system as well. So it's completely natural that when you have a chronic illness, when you have symptoms, especially if you don't have a diagnosis and you don't know what's going on, why you feel this way, that you're going to become hypervigilant. You're going to start avoiding foods, avoiding smells, avoiding, all these different things. And patients come to me saying, I'm eating 5 different foods. I'm scared of everything else. We have to work with the nervous system. We need to rewire the nervous system once this happens. So I think I try to advocate as long as, people are doing well enough, following something like an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, if you're eating this low inflammatory, nutrient-dense diet, 20% of the time, go out with your friends. Remember that food is such an important part of community and well-being that I don't want you thinking, no, I can't go out to dinner with friends because, gosh, they might be using canola oil to cook there. But people do this, right? Because we want to feel better. And, we take it, there was a new diagnosis a couple of years ago that was added to the DSM-10 or whatever it is. That's a psychiatric diagnostic manual called orthorexia. Are you guys familiar with orthorexia? Orthorexia is basically an eating disorder that is focused around eating only healthy food. So people start to think, I can only eat organic. I can, only eat if it was cooked in olive oil, avocado oil. So it's something to be aware of that, yes, we need to be eating foods that are good for us, that don't disagree with us. But we also need to remember that food serves a lot of different purposes. And as Dr. Ramzi just said, look, how you're eating makes a difference. And if you're out to dinner with your friends, incredibly anxious that there might be canola oil there or some cilantro, and you're not sure if you should be upregulating your detox with cilantro, that's going to impair your digestion. 20% of the time, let it go. Maybe that doesn't mean, gluten or In-N-Out burger, right? Like we can be reasonable with that 20%, but having a little bit of flexibility because food serves so many different purposes.
Certainly, nutrition is a hot topic, and I'm all glad that you all chimed in here. We're going to get to your questions next, and I'm going one final question to Dr. Amy, actually. We talked about all different type of elements of how to treat autoimmune diseases. But I'm also curious from this environmental toxins that we're having right now, that sometimes we don't even know if we have it at home, outside, we're exposed all around. My question is, what are some of the recommendations you have for detoxification? And to our audience, what are some of the tips that you can share to them? That'll be great.
So detoxification is a big topic, and I think 1, 2, and 3 in terms of being aware of detoxification is removing what you can, but again, this also fits with what I was just saying about the 80-20 rule with food. We also need to think about If you can at home, you want to store your food in glass, not plastic. Hopefully none of us are microwaving in plastic anymore, but baby steps. So thinking about food storage containers, the products that we're putting on our skin or on our hair, right? Because everything is going to get absorbed through our skin. So certainly minimizing the things that we're exposed to, but we live in a really urban environment, so we're going to get some toxin exposures. Simple things you can do if you have access to a sauna, whether it's dry sauna or infrared sauna, maybe something like 10 to 15 minutes of sauna. One of the studies, some of the, I think, Scandinavian countries where sauna is a little bit more part of the culture actually showed decrease in cardiovascular disease risk with more frequent sauna. Even 7 minutes, people were doing it maybe 5 days a week, but I think just getting in sweating, right? You want to make sure that you're sweating normally. That's one way we excrete. Also making sure you do have regular digestion, right? And regular bowel movements, because that's another way that we excrete. So whenever I'm doing a targeted detox protocol with patients in particular, we want to make sure that bowels are moving normally. Drinking, filtered water, that's something else you can think about. I normally do heavy metal testing and environmental toxin testing for most of my patients to know if I should be doing a really targeted detox approach. Because if somebody does have a high toxic burden, again, whether it's heavy metals, we can also test for glyphosate, which is the compound in Roundup, right? Most of us have been exposed to glyphosate. Other environmental compounds, things that are added to gasoline fuels, bleaches, fertilizers, we can test for those. If I have somebody who has a high toxic burden, I'm going to be using a lot of nutrients, herbs that support detoxification, things like dandelion root. You can use milk thistle, you can use cilantro. These things are going to upregulate our phases of detoxification. Certain amino acids, glycine, taurine, these are going to be helpful. I think once you get into detoxification, it's probably helpful to work with a practitioner. You also want to know, is there something that you're specifically trying to clear out of the body? General detox, sauna, Epsom salt baths, making sure you're sweating, exercise, sweating a couple times a week. But then once you get into the more targeted detox, I think that can get pretty nuanced in terms of how to approach a detox protocol. So that I would probably do under more direct guidance.
Just want to add, that's great. Thank you, Amy. Just to add to that a little bit about the Ayurvedic version of detox. So I agree with all of that and would add that something you could do on a daily basis, and it's basically how I survive, is set your own practice of Ayurveda at home. And Ayurveda just basically means science of life. It's not, anything religious or anything like that. It's a science of life. Ayurveda includes yoga, it includes breath work, it includes meditation, and it includes daily detox practices. So I'll talk about the fourth, and I just want to touch on a couple others. So the daily detox practices include oil pulling. So I don't know if you guys have heard about oil pulling. You just take about a tablespoon of oil. It could be coconut oil, it could be sesame oil, olive oil, whatever oil you've got at home, organic, hopefully. Put it in your mouth, swish it around. The research is showing that 20 minutes a day, twice a day is what you need. I do 5 minutes if I can have that time and multitask while you're doing it. But doing that twice a day can make a really big difference in terms of your daily detox. Remember, the mouth is actually where a lot of our toxins come in first, right? Definitely in your nasal passage, but also your mouth. And then in addition to that, there is, oil massage, right, is a typical part of Ayurveda. You can do it on yourself. You just get yourself some oil, go through the self-massage on yourself, do that twice a day. It's incredibly integrating for your nervous system, helps you relax, helps you sleep properly, helps you get through the day, the next day. And then dry brushing. Really simple, just get yourself a dry brush, like you would brush a dog, and you brush yourself like you would brush your dog. And when you do it, you go in the opposite, you go towards your heart, essentially. You go towards the center of your body, go around, make sure you don't forget your breasts and don't forget your back and your belly, women. Really important, but do that every single day, if you can, twice a day. And I add that to the times when I brush my teeth. So as part of brushing your teeth, there's about 15, 20 minutes put aside for these additional pieces that anyone can do. And then taking a relaxing bath or shower before you go to bed, because sleep is where we restore. Sleep is where we just detoxify. And so again, in Ayurveda, you don't stay up late. You try to go to bed by 10 o'clock if you can. I'm sure everyone is already exhausted by then. So if you have an autoimmune condition, you go to bed by 10. Try to stay asleep through the night and get up before 6 if you can. And then when you get up in the morning, one of the first things you do is you do breath work. And can't emphasize this enough, because in the worst days, this works. And it's pranayama. It's basically belly breathing or alternate nostril breathing. It's incredibly cleansing, and you can literally feel things clear from you right away. Yes, it accumulates again, and you have to keep doing it. But the difference between doing that and not doing that is so dramatic that it's worth it. And then, I'll always put this in: meditate. Okay? Meditation twice a day. There's so much research on it, on the effects on methylation pathways, on epigenetics. This stuff is just booming. It's coming out all the time. But yet people aren't doing it because, hey, why not just take this extra cool, new substance that's been created? But you can sit down, do breath work, and meditate 5 minutes. Start with 5 minutes twice a day if you can. The reason it's twice a day is because you need to detox at the end of the day. Because you're accumulating all this throughout the day. You have to get rid of it before you go to bed. And then I'm just going to add this one more thing, because this is a really important practice, is before you go to sleep, journal. Okay? Because I truly think and believe that many diseases start with emotional challenge, some sort of emotional issue, emotional regulation. Something is there in your life where you're not connecting with your emotion, whether it's grief or something. So before you go to bed, just get yourself a little piece of paper, journal, just write everything on your mind down, anything you can possibly think of, and put it aside. Don't even have to look at it again, and then go to sleep. Because again, you want to have as much restorative sleep as possible.
I completely agree, and both of you guys alluded to the nervous system. I mean, that's one of my successful patients, they work on their nervous systems. And there's many ways to do that. Certainly meditation is one of the great ways. Emptying your head by journaling is fantastic. All of these methods. But the successful people, the ones who get better, work on their nervous system. They realize that the importance. And you have to set up, in fact, I had a conversation today with a patient. I said she was wondering she's getting a new job and has 3 kids, and wondering how to structure her life. I said, to get better, plan out, she was doing a part-time job, so I said, plan out 2 hours a day. That's your protected time. That's your time to do whatever you decide to do in terms of your nervous system, meditation, yoga. And we're not talking about Bikram's yoga, we're talking about restorative yoga. And oil pulling, whatever. And carve your life around those 2 hours. And depends how sick somebody is and how motivated, but at least, for real improvement, it's at least an hour a day of these types of activities that you've been hearing about.
Thank you. That was, I think, very insightful. I would think that you guys would agree too. Just looking at from all kinds of lenses, from Ayurvedic to actually more cutting edge stuff than talking about detoxification. I want to actually open up to the questions. I know you guys have been waiting, so I want to allow you guys to ask questions to doctors. Please just raise your hand, and I would like you to introduce yourself and also ask a brief question so that we can get as many of them possible. Any questions?
Thank you very much for this session. It was very informative, and I'm fairly new to this field and learning, and I've been reading How Not to Die, The Good Gut, and trying to catch up with meditation and bunch of other stuff. I find out about this company, you probably know it, it's called uBiome. You send stool samples, 6, and they return you the results, and they have some suggestions. Their suggestions are somewhat confusing. Like some bacteria, they suggest more meat-based diet, and for some they suggest more plant-based diet. And what do you guys think about that? Should we like try to figure this stuff out on ourselves, or should we not maybe mess with it with this kind of trials? I'm curious what you think about it. Thank you.
I think stool testing, gut testing in general is pretty nuanced, and there are a couple different companies that do it. We have limited experience with Ubiome, and my impression at this time is Ubiome might not be ready for prime time, that you might use it for some guidance. So I would take the information you get from Ubiome with a grain of salt, and you could certainly try some of the recommendations. And what I like about testing is not taking it too literally, but using it as a guideline. So are you saying that it provided conflicting data? Feels like conflicting data. So I would consider, experimenting with these different types of diets, maybe saying 30 days I'm going to try this, 30 days I'm going to try this, and then seeing how you feel better. So use the testing just as guidelines. There are a few things that I will use to help guide dietary preference. Certainly certain conditions will dictate the diet I'm using. There are a few genetic types that I will look at to help guide dietary decisions. But again, for the most part, it's trial and error because there's only one you.
I do use Ubiome all the time on my patients, just because I think I worked for Genova and did their stool testing and all that stuff. So I know the difference between these stool tests. Ubiome in particular is doing sequencing. It's cutting edge. They've got a huge database. I use them because they have a huge database and they're very research driven. They're in fact more research driven than I think most of the other labs that are out there. But that being said, is it clinically relevant? And in general, nobody in the microbiome space is at that point where they're clinically relevant yet. Because think of it as, it's early stages because there's so many bacteria and we're trying to make correlations. And as the research is coming out, we're making these correlations. And the way that they're giving you those reports is they're looking at an individual bacteria and the research finding. So sometimes it'll be like, this bacteria is found, is increased amount in this diagnosis and is decreased in that. But just like with genetic data, as more and more of it is coming out, more and more people are getting sequenced, we'll start to make stronger correlations. So for that reason, I do like using it because I think it's important information and we need to understand it. What we do know is that dietary changes are incredibly important to their effects on the gut microbiome, more so than even taking a product or probiotic, right? We know that the probiotic is as relevant as when you're taking it. And the dietary effects are more long-term, even though they're not permanent, but they're slightly more long-term. So I use it with that in mind. You do have to do a little bit digging because the research that they're using is a little bit fixed. It's not a continuous feed that's being updated. So if you're really curious, you can look up the bacteria yourself and look on, you can Google it or you can look on PubMed and see what the latest literature is showing about it. I think there's some cool stuff like with Akkermansia and obesity and Bifidobacterium. There's definitely some interesting correlations, but it's still at the point where it's correlation, not causation.
Hi. Thank you all for being here. This has been a great event. I've really enjoyed learning a lot from you tonight. My name is Anne. I have two questions. My first is, can you talk about the differences and similarities between the functional medicine approach to treating autoimmune diseases versus naturopathic? And then my second question is it ever too late to treat an autoimmune disease just based on how long a person has had it, and maybe it's been going untreated or treated with conventional medicine, or just based on their age?
Well, I'll take the second question first, because that's easier. It's never too late. However, and then alluding to your first question, I'm not a naturopath, but I know that naturopaths use a lot of functional medicine in their approach. So I think in many ways they're similar. It's probably very practitioner dependent, depending on which naturopath you see versus which other practitioner you see. We're all MDs, but lots of people that do functional medicine are not MDs. In terms of somebody who's really far advanced, for example, if they have lupus with a little bit of brain involvement, my goal, or Crohn's disease with severe strictures and narrowing, and they need, I would support them in getting an injection of an antibody or Humira or something. Sometimes we need, or steroids or whatever, to calm it down. We need to use a combined approach if their disease is at an advanced state. But then the standard functional medicine approach applies, and I transition from the conventional into the functional medicine, because the conventional is good for more urgent or emergent situations.
About your question about naturopathic medicine, I think they're both very similar. I have many naturopathic friends that are like, you darn functional medicine people, they're stealing our ground. And I think there's some truth to that. There's a lot of correlation between the two. The difference, I would say, is that functional medicine is not approaching things in what we call green pharmacy. So it's not supposed to be disease to treatment, but instead of using a pharmaceutical, we're using a natural agent. We're trying to move away from that one-to-one relationship into a many-to-many relationship to try to see where are the imbalances, and if we tip this way, what happens? If we tip that way, what happens? And how do we get back to balance? And that sometimes doesn't take a nutraceutical or a pharmaceutical. It takes meditation, or something else like that. So I think it just brings in a lot more of a holistic point of view. The other piece is there are many naturopaths that don't really agree with a lot of testing. They in fact don't do it. And whereas functional medicine doctors, as you've heard, we like tests, we like doing it, we like to know what's going on inside. So it's a little bit more of science, not the other one's not science-based, but we're moving more towards trying to prove this out in a scientific framework.
Hello, my name is Elif. So this was very helpful information. I recently got a diagnosis of Hashimoto's, and that was in my family. I was a little bit familiar with that. But unless you experience it yourself, you don't get into this world of there is an alternative. And once you start researching practitioners, books, self-help, all this stuff, it gets really exhausting psychologically. And for me as a counselor educator, if I find it this exhausting, I can't imagine what any regular person, would go through. So, and I think that has a lot to do with the realities of how expensive these type of services are right now. I'm a patient with UCSF with their functional medicine, integrative medicine. They put me on a wait list for 6 to 8 months. So we have to go through this ourselves for a while. Especially with the realities of the Bay Area. So, so I was wondering if you can comment on if people has to go through that on their own for a while without being able to see a practitioner, what at least they should avoid, what they should not do, maybe. What would bring harm when they are trying to work on that self-help. And then the other thing is that a strong theme that I hear in the panel is the nutrition. At least we can avoid certain types of food and be in control of what we eat. So for me, my strategy is that I will get some sort of food allergy or sensitivity tests. Also, similarly with that, there's a big range. There are very expensive tests, very cheap tests. And again, at least what we should avoid, what we should stay away, just to protect our psychology in this whole process, but at the same time, financially, what to avoid. Thank you.
So I like that question. I had it's expensive to see us, and we some of us don't take insurance and all that. So I understand that, and the testing is expensive. So I also really believe in the trying to find what, like when you have that situation, you really try to fine tune the most important recommendations. So for somebody waiting with a diagnosis of autoimmune disease, seeing the conventional endocrinologist or primary care, easy to do a lot of what we've said up here. Okay, work on the nervous system, the diet. Do your paleo reset diet. Do a 30-day paleo reset diet, or actually just do paleo and stay on it. Or another dietary approach, limiting gluten, dairy. Be as aggressive as you think you need to be, but don't shut yourself out socially. I think definitely gluten is the big bad boy. Correlation between Hashimoto's and celiac disease you've probably read about. But so definitely avoid that and see what else you can reasonably avoid. Work on the nervous system and then bide your time. If you have an insurance-paid clinic that you can go to, great. If it's going to be sometimes. I think that's my main advice there.
Great. We're going to, I know there's one question here.
Hi, I'm Gavin. Question. Do you guys have any experience with like medicinal mushrooms like chaga, turkey tail, and reishi mushrooms as part of your functional medicine practice? And if so, where do you guys source it and all of that stuff?
So I would say I use some reishi and lion's mane are the two mushrooms that I've been using, and I've mostly been using tinctures. And I can see the label. Immune support, something like that, but I don't know if there's a way we can follow up. I think it's called Host Defense is the brand. Yeah, so Host Defense. So I use reishi quite a bit for immune support, treating certain infections, lion's mane, some interesting research in terms of potentially Alzheimer's, cognitive support there. So those are the two that I primarily use, and I think it's Host Defense.
Same, I just mostly use reishi mushrooms. Oh, I don't use that product, but reishi mushrooms.
I use some in complex treatments of infections, usually in combination with tinctures. I'm not experienced with using individual mushrooms.
And reishi, I'll also use Herb Farm. And I use those two brands just because I feel comfortable with their sourcing and their production. We try to, supplements are not well regulated, right? So for the most part, I have a few brands that are my go-to. I feel comfortable with their sourcing, their processing, and those are two that I'm comfortable with. There's probably other good ones.
I know there's a lot of more questions, but we reach 8:30. I want to be respectful of our doctor's time. And we may hang out a little bit more, so if you're just going to chill out a little bit afterwards, please do so. I actually want to really thank everybody for coming in today. It's been amazing. Some of the questions were great, and I think our panelists asked great questions. I wanted to say a couple of things, because in the beginning of my discussion, I was talking about try to take this event and try to get something out of it, something insightful, and hopefully do something with it. I think you. Hopefully you do that, and I want to make sure that do that, make that change, and please keep us in touch. syncH is a community. We've built this just to create that connection between us, and I think let us know. We're here. We're going to do more of these events. Hopefully we can get more of these events going, and we're going to touch on different subjects as well. Please let us know. And I also, on behalf of our team, the syncH team, and all the sponsors that we mentioned, I want to thank you guys, and also I want to thank our panelists, our doctors, for coming in today. And have a great night. Thanks a lot. We're going to stick around a little bit. If you guys want to try some gluten-free ciders, they're over there. Definitely, there's still more snacks. Feel free to hang out. We're going to be here for another half hour. Thank you.